Good afternoon, everyone. I cordially welcome you all for the fourth lecture of short course on cultural linkages toward Asian ideology. Today, we are focusing on building an Asian community, political issues and challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, may I now have the honor of introducing our guest lecturer, Mr. Nuwan Herath, Head of the Department of Social Sciences of the Faculty of Management, Social Science and Humanities at the General Sir John Kotarava Defense University. Our estimate guest holds a Master of Arts in Peace Studies from the University of the Notre Dame in the USA, a Master of Arts in Complete Peace and Development Study from the Sri Bhavan University in Nepal, and the Bachelors of Arts in Peace and Conflict Resolutions with the first class from the University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. Mr. Nuwan Herath is a senior academic in the field of social sciences with many years of experience teaching at the university level. He has contributed his vast academic knowledge to the real world by conducting research on monastic reforms, post-war Sri Lanka and human rights violations to name a few. He has also been awarded scholarship by NORAD and the Giant Beecroft Institute in the USA for his postgraduate studies. In addition to his role at the KDU, he holds and has held positions at the Sri Lankan Air Force Academy, the University of Kelaniya, the Croft Institution for International Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame, the Constituent Assembly election in Bhojpur in Nepal, and the Foundation for Coexistences in Sri Lanka. Sir, we are profoundly honored to have you with us here, and we warmly welcome you to deliver the lecture. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Situmini, for that introduction. Good afternoon to everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, you are audible. You can hear us. Yes,
okay,
please.
Right. So first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Hemant Premaratna for inviting me to conduct this short lecture. And also would like to thank Eurasia Foundation for their generous funding to conduct this course at the Department of Social Sciences, KD. Right. So to begin with, today's topic that I'm going to talk about is building an Asian community, political issues and challenges. So when we think about building a community, one of the main things with respect to community is that there should be relationships, there should be links, a lot of connectors. But in today's session, I will be talking about basically the dividers, not about connectors. So to enhance connectivity, to build relationships, build networks, it is also important to have an idea about what are the dividers, and also what are the challenges behind building a community. So today's session will basically discuss about the challenges that we face. Okay, so to begin with, what do I mean by building an Asian community? Building healthy relationships among people, institutions, and nation states in Asia with a positive sense of Asianness. So, as you know, when it comes to a community across the borders, right? The most important aspect is the relationship between or among people across the borders. And there are also institutions that interact across borders. And nations also, there are bilateral, trilateral, and multilateral relationships. So when we think about this Asianness, it is not some kind of a, something that is out there. we have to create it. We have to achieve it. We have to achieve a kind of a positive sense about Asianness, so being Asian. And that can be done by building healthy relationships. So that is what I mean, building Asian community. So there is this geographical location, geographical area, what we consider as Asia. And there are different people, different cultural groups, different societies, institutions, and nation states are embedded. But unless these groups, people, and institutions, they make networks, make connections, we won't be able to realize this common sense of an Asianness, right? So therefore, it's very important to have these connections. And there are so many connections or cultural linkages that can help us towards making this sense of cohesion. Like, for example, religion, language, business, sports, tourism, science and technology, values and ways of life. There are so many things that can connect us together. Now, for example, if we think about religion, people, travel across the borders for various religious pilgrimages. So religion in that sense is a very important connector, right? Now, because of the science and technology advancement, we can listen to various religious talks. I'm sure most of the Sri Lankans, even though Sinhala Buddhists, might have listened to talks given by this famous Indian religious guru Sadhguru, right? Religious teacher Sadhguru. So why do we get to sort of listen to these things? Because of the connectivity of science and technology, right? So science and technologies I have highlighted in red in the presentation because it's a very important field, important area where these cultural linkages are connected together, right? Networks can be built or they have already been enhanced by science and technology. And there are other aspects like sports, tourism. They are very much important because building networks, a lot of networks in Asia, and there are so many networks related to these aspects. So they are connectors basically. But the focus of today's lecture is on the other side, dividers, right? So, and also some of these connectors can also become dividers. Now, for example, if we think about religion, it can also be a source of a divider. We have seen a lot of violence, right? That have religious background, religiously motivated violence in various South Asian, for example, in context, Hindus and Muslims, and so on. Political issues related to language rights and so on. So some of these connectors that can help us making networks can also become divided, not because that they have a kind of intrinsic or ambivalent nature that is embedded within them. Actually, we as actors, humans, we kind of make them work in two different ways. Sometimes we can use them to build networks, and also we can use them to divide us. Right. So in today's lecture, I'll be basically giving you a kind of an overview about some of the political issues and challenges that might hold back. And some of, I mean, they have already done that. They have held so many things back towards achieving a kind of a common understanding, a more broad understanding as Asians. So as I said, yes.
So very extremely sorry to disturb you. Can you please make the slides little bit larger?
Sure.
Yeah, then yeah.
Is
Yes,
it clear enough?
fine.
Okay.
Very good now.
Fine.
It is clear.
Right. Okay. So political issues. I was just introducing what are the political issues. So these issues are there across the nation states in various communities in Asia, and they have led to various conflicts, violence, and wars between Asian nation states, people, and communities. So this session will briefly discuss the following political issues, and it is very important that Asia to become a more stable, politically stable region in the future, just like, for example, Western Europe, maybe, to overcome these issues in the future. But these are very complex issues. Probably Asia is the continent that is going through probably some of the most complex problems of the present day. So therefore, and also Asia is very large, and as you know, it's very diverse, right? So the issues are also extremely diverse and very complex as well. But it is, even though these issues are there, some of them I have listed down here, and I'll be giving you a little introduction one by one. So even though these issues are there, it does not mean that we can't build connections. We can't develop networks. It is through the networks that we develop, we bring a society, we bring a community into being, right? So first thing I would like to, mention is that we have to think a society or a community as an achievement. It is not something just out there. We have to realize it. So if you are talking about social relationships, cultural relationships between Asians, we basically have to look at it as an achievement. We have to realize it through networking. But these issues that I have listed here, some of them may be a kind of can be seen as barriers or challenges against that realization. So let me just then go to the first issue or challenge. That is, first one is ideological differences. So what is an ideology? Now, political ideology is a particular system of political thought. So we know that we are, even our day-to-day activities, we are kind of informed by some set of ideas, right? Ideas are everywhere. But ideology is probably a kind of a system of political thought, which means that they are kind of organized with some kind of a rationale. So in the world of politics, we can see there are some organized systems of political thought that influence political decision makers, nation states, and various other actors, right? So nation states are influenced by different political ideologies in their formation as well as in their function. So ideologies, normally you can see a lot of isms like Marxism, liberalism, feminism, nationalism, right? There's a lot of isms are being used when it comes to ideologies, and I have listed some of them. So there are, you can see there are some far left ideas, left-wing ideas that are kind of related to Marxist-Leninist views, and also far right ideas related to nationalism or extreme sense of liberalism or neoliberalism. So we kind of divide, countries, political groups, political parties based on these labels: left-wing political party, leftist movement, nationalist movement, probably an opposite of it, a liberal state. So these labels are being used. And in Asia, we can see that there are states that are influenced by these political ideologies. And sometimes there are states with some contrasting ideological backgrounds, yet they exist in proximity to each other. And some of the states, they have some conflicts between them as well, right? So ideology is kind of act as a default situation, but only thing is, how do you take decisions based on by using ideologies? So these overarching political ideologies influence policy making, right? When political actors, governments, when they take decisions, ideology can influence. For example, if a state decides to have some welfare policies, promote welfare, that can be influenced by socialism or Marxist-Leninist ideas, basically Marxist or socialist ideas. Now, even Sri Lanka, when we label our country or when we denote our country, we say Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. That particular term includes number of ideological bases. Have liberal democracy on one hand, democratic. Socialist, it has some socialist character also, where this welfare, character comes from. And it's also, it has republicans, people's rule. So these terms, they come up with some ideological basis. So in policy making also, ideology plays a pivotal role. When governments take decisions, those decisions can be influenced by certain set of systems of political thought. And public attitude also can be influenced by these systems of political thought, and also external relations, where countries make relationships with other states. So sometimes countries with a socialist background can be more inclined towards having relationships with similar states, right? Nowadays, it may not be the case, but when it comes to external relations, the ideological similarities are very important, and countries choose to have relationships because of those ideological similarities. So the question is, how can Asians transcend these ideological differences? How they can overcome these ideological differences of their nation states to form a common sense among themselves? Is it possible? Right? It is not impossible, it is possible. States have ideologies, people are also informed by them. For example, there are people in certain countries, they are very much informed by their nationalist ideologies. So part of their nationalist ideologies is against another state or another country. We think about India, Pakistan, for example, and Asian countries with Sunni and Shia Muslims. So their nationalist religious ideologies are very much gone through the mindsets of the people as well. So if people are to make ties, make networks, right, there is a requirement for them to sort of, think beyond these ideological rifts that states maintain. Right? So if we go to this particular picture, right? So this is a little bit of an old picture, but and this is constantly moving. So these different colors have been used to denote, to depict the ideological belongings. So countries with red, orange, they are more left wing, and blue, light blue, they are more towards the liberal right wing side, and gray and dark with no clear ideology. Sometimes political parties are illegalized in those countries. So you can see in a nutshell, or in a kind of a abstract form, how the Asia is kind of different. So if we use the same colors probably to show Europe, Western Europe, it may be not diverse as this. So therefore, Asia is ideologically also, in terms of political ideology, very a diverse context. So we have to think about building relationships, connectivities in this light, how we can sort of develop ties, develop networks across countries and people in a situation where there lies a lot of ideological differences. So that is first point that I want to make in this presentation. Now, second point is that these ideologies also help promoting or producing differences in government, different systems in government. So ideologies, when they are in place, right, when they are in practice, they shape governments and governance, right? And these different systems of government can shape the political culture of respective states, right? So governance systems in a socialist or Marxist country, or system in a Islamic republic where nationalism plays a pivotal role, there can be stark differences, and in a liberal state there can be stark differences. So you can see a lot of differences when it comes to the government, the way that these countries are governing people, right? So stark differences and contrasting differences can hinder the cooperation between states and communities. For example, a country with a dictatorship, where a dictator or one family controls the country for a long period of time, versus a liberal democracy, where a country has periodical elections and leaders get to change from time to time on a in a kind of a based on a fixed term, right? So even though there can be some cultural linkages of past, sometimes it could be difficult for countries like, as I mentioned here, North Korea and South Korea, to build relationships, right? To come to a kind of a understanding, because we know that even not only cultural but biological relationships were also there, but that is past. So culture is part of the past is also culture. But when we are talking about building a community, when we talk about building networks, so it needs to move on, needs to happen at this moment of time. So we can talk about North Korea and South Korea before the division, but nowadays hardly there are any cultural linkages. Therefore, different systems of government can also hinder people, institutions, nation states interacting, networking with each other. So the third political issue or challenge I want to mention is the competition for dominance. Now, Asia, as I mentioned earlier, is a very diverse place. And there are so many countries, some are very powerful, some are not that much powerful, and some are extremely weak countries are also there in terms of economy, in terms of the size of the military, so on, right? The hard power and soft power, right? So in Asia, there are some superpowers also, superpowers in the global context, and also superpower in regional context also. Now, one important rivalry is that the rivalry between China and India, their competence for dominance. This competition between the two countries can have a lot of impact on other countries and their relationships, right? So as we know, this rivalry between China and India, which came to presence with the skirmishes in 1962 with respect to the disputed Himalayan border in Ladakh and in other place and one other place. So the Sino-Indian War killed a lot of soldiers in both sides, and this issue once again also came up with the construction of a road in 2020 also. So this is some kind of an issue that has not been resolved, the border dispute between India and China. So in addition to that, there are different uh, stages, different locations where these two countries uh, compete with each other. Now, as I am sure most of you are following mainstream media in Sri Lanka also, we see how the politics being played by India and China, particularly the diplomatic influences and also other type of investments that Chinese and Indians are interested of making in Sri Lanka to expand uh, kind of virtual control on over other places in the region. So there is this, I mean, it's no secret that there is this competition for strategic locations like Colombo ports, Northern Peninsula, and the southern part of Sri Lanka, the Hambantota port, and so on. Those are all disputed, much debated issues in Sri Lanka. So therefore, small countries like Sri Lanka also kind of have to face this challenge, the competition for dominance between these larger countries, superpowers, and also their government decisions, their diplomatic relations, policy making, all these things kind of are going to get influenced by this competition of these powerful countries. Now we can discuss, I will just also briefly discuss about this South China dispute, where now India is also sort of trying to play a role there. So therefore, it's not a new thing to the world, right? But how these two countries will manage their disputes in future, it's going to be very crucial for the rest of the South Asia and the Asian region. And based on this competition, sometimes there can be various alliances, countries taking sides, switching sides, right? And there can be various restrictions with respect to movement of people, right? So therefore, now already some of, for example, in certain countries, people are not in these two countries. Also, some people are not being allowed to come. Some media is banned. So such restrictions are also there. So these competitions, these bipolar formation of political alliances, the polarization, we say polarization of the two countries and other countries around, two powerful countries, can be a kind of a hindrance to build this sense of Asianness or improve networks, because things can get polarized further in future. We never know. So because some of these issues are very old, if we think about this Sino-Indian voice, it's 1960s, but even 2020, the problem has kind of emerged once again, and these two nations seems to be in competition for dominance against each other. It's true that China is ahead, but India is also improving. Like, for example, now we are talking about India after 75 years. So India at the time when they got independence, it was, at the time of its, this partitioning of India, it seemed that it was a kind of a diverse place where, the post-colonial future was not going to be so bright and very difficult to manage. But India at 75 has managed so many issues. Now it is one of the leading economies, becoming a leading economies in the world. The largest human resource pool, one of the largest human resource pools in the world, the doctors, engineers, IT experts, a place where a lot of investors want to come and invest. And it has also become a kind of a space superpower also, entered into space also, and now it has got involved in arms trade as well. So therefore, in next few decades, India is definitely going to be a very crucial and important actor, not in South Asia. It is already an important actor in South Asia, as we already know, but in the world stage as well. So therefore, how India and China going to manage their differences that they had for a long period of time, it's going to be very crucial for the future of the region as well as for the future of Asia. So in addition to that, the next point I want to mention is that this is one of the biggest challenges, I would say. Most of the Asian countries, they have a lot of internal civil wars, internal conflict. Some of them actually internationalized internal conflicts and complex. Some are even more than civil wars. You can call them complex emergencies. So there are so many issues going on in various states. They are not fully settled in terms of internal peace. There are ongoing conflicts in number of states, and I have listed out some of the countries with civil conflicts in Asia. The Myanmar's internal conflict in the Rakhine state in Myanmar, the Rohingya Muslims conflict, the autonomy for these Rohingya people, that issue is still there. Indonesia separatist movement for a Papua, Indonesia-Papua conflict. Philippines, the Mindanao conflict, which involves number of parties, separate state of Mindanao, that separatist movement. The war in Afghanistan, it's, even though it looks that it's kind of come to some kind of a state. Now United States had pulled out its troops. Now Taliban is in control. We never know what is going to be the future of Afghanistan. and its relations with other countries. And this is, I mean, probably one of the best internationalized internal conflict in terms of international involvement, the Russians, the Chinese, the United States, and so on. So what would be the future of Afghanistan? And there are a lot of issues related to civil rights, human rights violations, and women's rights, and so on in Afghanistan. And the complex emergency in Middle East, ISIL insurgency in Iraq, the Syrian civil war, the war in Yemen, which involves a number of parties, a number of foreign actors and militant groups, armed groups in these countries. Now, Syrian war, it seems like the Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian leader, had kind of got the control more than 2/3 of its territory, but the conflict still continues. So therefore, this involves a lot of militant groups in the form of terrorism as well. So these things have destabilized a lot of regions in Asia, right? And also Thailand, the South Thailand, there is an insurgency, a resistance from Muslims. They want, again, separatism to be separated from Thailand. So these separatist wars, these wars to take over the power of the countries are continuing. They have not been fully resolved, right? So what are the reasons? Due to what reasons these civil wars might have emerged? And most of them are actually issues related to state formation, right? Forming of their states, power sharing, managing ethnic groups, and particularly separatist movements emerge. Most of them after a kind of a colonial legacy during the post-colonial stages of these countries, mainly due to issues with respect to managing the ethnic and nationalist groups in those countries. So these states have not been able to sort of create a system where ethnic groups are being managed, and also ethnic groups, on the other hand, they don't feel or they don't comfortable with living in that state. So there are a lot of other factors as well, like influential factors from other countries, international influences, and so on. And the next important factor is there are no reforms in some of these countries. There are no smooth transition of powers. Now, if you think about the Middle East region, particularly with the Arab Spring, we saw that people are standing up against some political leaders who held their respective offices for a long period of time, for decades. So no reforms, no constitutional reforms, no sharing of power, pretty much of a centralization of power. So there are issues basically with respect to governance. And also there are issues related to resource distribution. Some of the minority groups in those states where dictators have control, certain religious ethnic groups have been marginalized, and now once again all of a sudden they have started to act against those dictators. So we see these things happening in Syria, in Yemen, the Houthi rebels, and so on, with the way that they have been armed themselves and fighting. So a lot of regional politics, these states are also divided based on sectarian lines, religious, ethnic, and so on. So issues with respect to state formation, statecraft, right? And also issues related to governance, centralization of power, no reforms. These issues continue to sort of support the civil wars in these countries. So Where is the way out? This is the crucial question. For example, we can ask about these questions with respect to places like Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq. When these civil wars, when these complex emergencies going to end, right? And these are some of the crucial matters that are common to Asia and prevent a lot of people sort of building some kind of a common sense or common awareness or building networks. The common sense emerges through networks across the borders, right? So when we talk about cultural linkages in Asia, we have to talk about relationships beyond borders or transcendence, right? To overcome the petty differences of nationalistic and ethnic differences and have some kind of a greater sense about Asian. So in order to do that, can only be materialized through achieving it through networks. But these issues kind of prevent various communities dispersed all across the Asia, sort of making those networks. There are networks, but not for good. I mean, there are networks for fighting wars, right? There are networks for black market activities, right? War economies, but not the networks that are desirable by the majority. So therefore, these issues can be taken as hindrances to prevent uh, communities in Asia achieving or sharing their commonalities, sharing their similarities, and building some kind of a common sense across the nation state boundaries. Right. So I would like to sort of give you a little break before I move on. I hope that whatever the things that I have discussed up to now are clear. So I've been talking about a few issues and challenges. Just to give you a recap of what we have discussed, we talked about ideological differences, difference with respect to systems of government and uh, civil wars in countries. Those are some of the challenges. And so continuing on the same line, another challenge that I saw is unresolved or extended political conflicts in some of the places in Asia. And most of these conflicts are there for a long period of time as well, right? For example, India and Pakistan conflict over Kashmir. So it is one of the longest both countries ever since the partition of the two countries that has been there, right? So the Tibetan conflict is another issue when Tibet was kind of occupied by China. So India kind of, backed the Tibetan, the leadership, the Dalai Lama, and so on. So you can see this overlapping of these issues, the power struggles also coming into play, the competition, right, the borders, right. And another important issue, which is very much on the move, is the South China. Several countries, in fact, 6 countries, China, Brunei, Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, and so on. 6 countries, they claim for a disputed area in the sea. So China being the most powerful country, kind of being able to dominate, there is a kind of a power asymmetry or imbalance as well. Now India has also come to the scene by selling weapons to some of these countries like Philippines. Uh, uh, Indian missiles now they are selling to make these countries also strong in terms of responding to Chinese military activities. So therefore now this India, it's not in the South China is not, the sea is not part of India, but India is now interested in allying against the enemies of its enemy. And so enemy of the enemy is your friend. So based on that theory, India has now entered into the scene also. So we'll never know what would be the future of this particular dispute. And obviously the North-South Korea divide, once it was, one territory, but now politically divided. And there were talks also, as you know, this during President Donald Trump's period, there was a kind of a effort to sort of initiate talks between the two countries, but uh, that still the division still exists, and the North Korea is controlled by a kind of a family rule, a dictatorship. And also, in addition to these interstate long-standing political conflicts in Asia, there is also this recent emergence of conflict in Hong Kong, basically not necessarily a fully fledged armed conflict, but movement against the China, because when Great Britain handed over Hong Kong to China, there was some arrangement or promises, that is one country and two systems. So Hong Kong, being part of China, promised to have a different system from China. That is to have elections, liberal democracy, free press, and so on, which is not the case in China. But nowadays, Hong Kong people feel that those promises have been violated. So there were uprisings against the Chinese control. So, this is a kind of a very classical example of this different systems of government. It's quite difficult sometimes to reconcile. So this is a classic example for that, and it's a very unique case also, where one country, two systems exists. Right. So these problems are there in Asia, kind of dividing people, irrespective of their nationalities, and also irrespective of their ability to make connections. So in addition to that, another challenge that I have, political issue that I have identified for this presentation is there are also difficulties with respect to modernizing in certain communities. So modernization, we all know, with the beginning of the Enlightenment in Europe, the rational, free thinking, development of science and technology, all these things have brought modernization. Particularly the colonial countries also, introduced the colonial modernization by their colonial masters. Democracy is part of it, rights movements, technology, and so on. But there are some communities, like according to some of these scholars, particularly the Islamic groups, those who are quite radical in nature, not sort of willing to change, or maybe they want to maintain their own way of life, particularly referring to some hardcore radical principles or radical interpretations of their religion, and refusing to accept and absorb modern social values and norms and way of life, right? So we can see there are some issues with respect to women's rights, right? Women are being sort of restricted from various uh, activities, their social presence, their right to education, and so on. The religious freedom is prohibited in some of these places, right? Sexual rights, child marriages exist. So these things can be seen as pre-modern, not necessarily modern, and some of them are maybe some kind of punishments, laws maybe can be seen as more medieval than modern, right? So these things now, for example, even in Sri Lanka, we know that in our Sinhalese society, all in medieval times, sometimes the women were not given a chance to, for example, certain periods, not given a chance to have equal education, right? So they were kind of confined to household work, maybe. But these things have changed now. And there are instances of child marriages, also underage, like children, those who below 18. There are so many cases. But nowadays, because of modernization, modern standards, these things are not there, and there is no problem with adjusting it. But some of these communities, those who practice these radical versions of their religion, they refuse to have being complying with modern standards, right? And also they have become places of terrorism. Also, we know this Iraq and Syria being the epicenter of Islamic terrorism, according to the Sri Lankan scholar Nuwan Herath. Radicalization, going on, but nowadays, to a certain extent, that has been curtailed. But he says that there is also a risk that they can also, this epicenter can change to other parts of Asia, like South Asia having the largest Muslim population in the world, and Southeast Asia also. This epicenter can change to different places. And these radical views, or very hardcore, traditional yet radical views, can also, it's a kind of a very sort of a interesting paradox also. Right? So I was talking about this the paradox, radical yet also traditional. These communities, these groups in Asia continue to disrupt the mainstream communities in Asia. And also there are growing tensions between these groups and other religious groups, maybe Buddhist and Hindus. And also it is not to deny that there is no these extreme ideas in other religions. Also they are. And this also leads to kind of ethnocentric view. Ethnocentric views means looking at other ethnic groups from their own perspective, other people from one's own standards, right? Considering that one's own standard is the best standard, and others are just barbaric, or maybe they are not proper, right? So that is what we call ethnocentrism, particularly having very hardcore traditional ideas can lead to the building up of this ethnocentric idea. So it is again a matter of optics, the way we look at it, way people are kind of trained to look at. So Islam, particularly with respect to certain Islamic groups, this criticism is there for being very radical, and also want to not necessarily want to modernize themselves with modern values and sort of mingle with the other communities. So these difficulties in modernizing in some of the communities, it's also kind of a hindrance to making networks, to making connections. And the next issue that I want to take into consideration is politics of inequality. Asia also experiencing a lot of income inequalities with respect to income distribution, right? A lot of inequalities are there, as we know. For example, India being one of the classical examples, right? I'm sure most of you have seen the largest slum in the world in India. right? A lot of impoverished people, right? And also there are multimillionaires. When you talk about, for example, IPL, how much of money being invested into sports, for example. So inequality is there, and part of this inequality is probably the neoliberal economic agendas that some of these countries have. What do I mean by this neoliberal agendas? Is basically the social alliance is basically between big businesses and political elites. So economies are kind of handled, policy decisions are being taken in favor of facilitating the big businesses, believing that there will be a trickle down to the bottom, right? It is the only, probably the best way towards economic success. But this strategy has led to um, proliferation of a lot of impoverished people, because when governments take decisions, governments make infrastructure, make policies in favor of investments, big businesses, then they forget the majority of the people. But in a social democratic system, which is probably slightly a different, not slightly, a kind of a seriously different system, which is where we can see this alliance, social alliance is basically between political elite and the people. So decisions are taken in favor of the people. For example, if there are so many unemployed people, the governments try to enhance welfare, right? Enhance universal employment, right? Even if you are unemployed, you are given some money. So this situation can be unfavorable toward big businesses. So inequalities, it has been kind of studied that a lot of political economists in recent times, this neoliberal economic strategy that is creating economies favorable towards big businesses have also led to a lot of inequalities and social unrest. And one of the classic cases being this Red Corridor area in India, where this Naxalite movement is very much uh, was active, where there were accusations that the governments in India are sort of um, giving this important land that which belong to Adivasi people, or people from different minor castes, so called, and these people have kind of resisted against the state and joined armed movements. But these lands are given to big businesses for mining and various activities. Right? So therefore, whose interest is represented in governance is very important. And inequality basically it has become a major problem, because when governments represent the interests of, mainly the interests of the big businesses rather than the interest of the ordinary people. So this art of governance also it has become a problem in some countries, generating inequality. So South Asia is one place where you can see where there is a lot of inequality among people. So what are the so to wrap up the issues that I have mentioned, there are some other challenges when it comes to this building a sense of Asianness. So overcoming these issues, these long-standing issues, unresolved political debacles, is essential for building a peaceful Asia. And so Asia is engulfed with so many issues, as I have just summarized some of them, and it's very diverse. It's a large geographical area. So these issues have restricted people to develop networks, restricted people to cooperate across their borders, restricted people's ability to transcend their national borders and cooperate. But I'm still very much hopeful about science and technology, because which plays a very crucial role in transcending these national borders and kind of creating a virtual alternative platform for people to make networks. And also we need to understand the fact that Asia is not a place for a great deal of political homogenization. That means it's a diverse place. It's very difficult to make everyone same in Asia, right? It's immensely diverse. It's difficult to promote liberal democracy all over the place, all over the Asian nation states. It could be very difficult. So the Asianness, building an Asian community does not mean a political homogenization. It could be sort of maybe accepting differences, yet sometime maybe accepting differences, yet creating particular channels or actor networks where people can, you know, build connections. It could be science and technology, it could be research across the borders, it could be business, tourism, sports. These are the avenues that can transcend all the political restrictions, the issues that we have discussed, and kind of develop this important idea of Asians. And therefore, Asianness should not be mistaken as an essentialist idea. That means we should not take Asia as some kind of a thing that is out there. Or there is a thing called Asianness. Right? There is no essence called Asia, basically. Right? It's not a category out there. We have to realize it. So Asianness should be viewed as an achievement through various networks. If there are political restrictions, if there are political issues, we need to explore what are the alternative ways of developing networks, right? And also, we need to take the Asia from a syncretistic perspective. That means kind of combining different perspectives while being open to other cultural and political categories such as Europe or West. So building Asia does not mean creating some kind of a unique identity that is totally different from the West or other parts of the world. It is not like that. It has to be, people should be open to learn from other countries, and also sometimes some of the categories that they make, right? Some of the definitions that they make. Now, Asians, we are sometimes very much comfortable with some of the colonial constructions about our own way of life. For example, when Britishers came to India, they saw, they didn't see a monotheistic religion, they saw hundreds of religious beliefs. So Britishers were kind of surprised to see, and it was quite difficult for them to understand. So they used the term Hinduism. Right? So Hindu, according to scholars, historians like certain historians like Romila Thapa, Hinduism is a British invention. So they labeled it as Hinduism. Now, like you can see a lot of Hindu, these categories have been internalized. Right? So therefore, I mean, you know, our relationships, our social life is kind of influenced by a lot of other interpretations, definition, and categories as well. And there shouldn't be any resistance also. So the openness is very important. However, critically engaging with the Western construction about Asia is an important first step also, because sometimes there can be some negative constructions also. So we need to, Asians might also need to sometimes think what is Asianness as well in when they're making networks, right? There can be some very how do you call this, very prejudiced ideas, stigmatized ideas also, because some Western authors, early sociologists and anthropologists, have seen Asia as a mysterious place, right? And also Asians, we see the West as the safe haven because of some of the political problems, but also we need to think that things can be changed by networks, things can be changed by human agency, things can be transformed by Let's see. And a new community can be realized, right, beyond the horizon. So therefore, being open to networks, being open to realizing a society, seeing society as an achievement is a very important precondition if we are to think about cultural linkages as an Asian community. So I hope that I have been able to sort of give you some ideas to think about. And with that, I would like to end my small presentation, short presentation. And so if you have any questions, please feel free to raise those questions now. Thank you very much. Sri Lanka is a country of geographical and economic strategic importance, but keeping India as a neighbor, a big economically and politically powerful country, many problems have arisen in dealing with other powerful countries in Asian region. Even if a ship from a powerful country in the Asian region like China arrives in Sri Lanka, India pays a lot of attention to it. As a country with a declining economy, Asian community cooperation is very important to us. How can we build our country with Asian community cooperation without offending a powerful country like India? Right. So yeah. So the question is how can Sri Lanka?
Question was asked by Kasun, I guess. Kasun,
Okay.
yeah, Sapu Mohan.
So yeah.
Yes.
So
Sorry,
thank
please.
you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Kasun, for
Yeah.
the question. Yes, I think there is a separate field called diplomacy, right? Which is, I mean, diplomats are, experts in this field. So this needs to be handled diplomatically, right? So I'm. If you are interested in political history, I would like to sort of uh, invite you to sort of read about what kind of a role that Prime Minister Sirimao Bandaranaike played during the time when there was this Sino-Indian War. It could have been turned out to a big conflict, but she, I think, played a pivotal role. So therefore, balancing relations between these countries, it's up to the diplomats and the art of diplomacy. And also, I think Sri Lanka, even though this ship came and there was this lot of attention, I think somehow it has been managed to even though it was kept for a few days and so on. So I think we have to handle these problems diplomatically, and also we have to be very clear with our foreign policy. Right? Very clear with foreign policy, and Sri Lanka needs to, one of the gift that history has given to Sri Lanka is the non-aligned policy. So in order to sort of have that, we need in real life to execute that non-aligned policy. But we have over the years, if we look at particularly the period after 2010 to 2015, we have kind of drifted away from that non-aligned policy and we being so close to China. So that is why India is so concerned and a lot of Chinese investment. But now we know there are a lot of issues with when it comes to returns out of these Chinese investments. So therefore, non-aligned policy is very important. I mean, one could say that nowadays we can't be non-aligned. We basically need to align with everyone. That argument is also there. So not necessarily non-alignment, but aligning with everyone. So the idea is basically you need to maintain good relationships with everyone as a small country, rather than being quite sort of aligned towards a one particular country. So that I think paved the way towards some of the kind of that alignment towards China kind of had a cost, and I hope that I have answered your question, Kasu.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Yes, I also have a question.
Okay.
So, as you know, many Asian countries were under British influence, or let's say the Western influence. with the world wars, and before that the British imperialism. So what I have is, now if I take Japan as an example, after World War II, they had this constitution which was in 1947, 47, which came into power. But in that, the constitution was made by a Western person. So the question I have is, the ideologies that we call as the Asian ideologies, even in Sri Lanka also, we had the Western influence. So what is the authenticity of the Asian ideologies?
Okay, so that's a good question. You're asking about, is there any authentic thing called Asia? That is why that is why I said we should not take Asianness as an essentialist idea. There is nothing called something that lasting forever, or something that there has been from the history called an essence called Asia, or Asian whole, right? It's not like that. So these are geographical regions that we have made, but I mean, being in a certain geographical location, people had relationships. So if we are to sort of realize some kind of a Asianness, that is why I said we have to look at society as an achievement. So if we are to build a kind of a common sense as an Asianness, we have to develop networks, we have to develop ties, and through these networks only we can kind of develop something unique to Asia, right? So and Western influence, because of the colonial expeditions and colonial control. So there have been a lot of relationships and also a lot of control over these countries. So that has been there. And Sri Lanka, the modern state Sri Lanka is also a result of colonialism, because if you think about when the time this Portuguese came, this island was divided into certain kingdoms. So when the Britishers left, they left a unitary state. India also like that. India, there was no country called India, and Pakistan. So these are new states, results of colonialism. So you can't deny the fact that there is this colonial legacy, colonial inheritance, Western influence. You can't deny. But people in Asia, they see that there are connections, there were connections in the past, but that is past. So for the future and for the time being, if we are to sort of, because of our geographical belonging, to develop a kind of a common sense, then it has to be done through networks. And there is nothing called it's very difficult to say that there is something authentic, there is completely unique thing to Asia. I am not with that view. I hope I have answered your question.
Thank you, sir. I have another question,
Okay.
and that question is based on there's this saying that people are saying the reasons why Asia has so many civil wars is because there's underlying Western influence to make problems in those countries, because the Western countries, they are not they do not like Asia getting more power than them, like the superpowers like China, India is on the way to become a superpower. So the unified Asia is much more powerful than the westernized countries' powers. So what are your thoughts on that regard?
Yeah, that argument is also there. That but at the same time, some of the powerful countries like United States, particularly during the Obama's period, there was this foreign policy called pivot to Asia. That means they wanted to have more relationships with Asian countries. So there are a lot of Western countries, they are working collaboratively with so many Asian countries. So I think some of the power dynamics between like India, China versus United States, so China versus some of the European countries, those competitions for world dominance and differences in political systems, for example, democracy versus socialism, uh, China being a one-party country where there is no democracy, one-party control in China, so some differences in values. those things, and also some taking economic control of various aspects, like particularly the oil politics. Those things have kind of led to the emergence of some of the arguments that you have said. So I can't necessarily see that there is kind of a ulterior motive to destabilize Asia by the Western countries. It is not the case. And if you now see, for example, there are so many American investments in India, right? A lot of Western companies want to come and invest in India. So it is not that if they won't do it if they want to sort of prevent the emergence of India. So it's not like that. But some of the political rivalries or ideological, some of due to different political systems, and also this emergence of bipolarity political competition for world dominance has led to emergence of arguments like that, like the China and US differences, right? But it is not applicable to entire Asia. And it's very difficult to believe that there is a kind of ulterior motive or there is a Western interest to sort of destabilize Asia. I hope it is
Thank
clear.
you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Kashun, and thank you, Selini. Both are from FMSH, especially from the Department of Social Sciences. Actually, I would like to hear some comments, questions from other faculties as well. Right? Any we can give one chance, right?
Okay.
Time is running up. So if you have any question, yes. So please ask. Please unmute your mic and ask. That would be great.
There is a comment. Okay, anyway, since it's from a different faculty, I'll read it.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Neoliberals believe that privatization of the public sphere and deregulation of corporate sector is best. But although it sounds good in paper, neoliberalism has continuously proved to be an imperfect financial policy that has helped the rich become richer and the poor become poor. In countries that follow this political and economic philosophy, what would be the best course of action to rebuild the country while also helping the average citizens? Yes. So that's a very good question. I think if you think about how I think Dr. Hemantha would be the best person to answer this question. I think if you think about how United States and most of Europe developed after the Great Depression in 1930s, basically because of social democratic economic policies. So a lot of people think that economists also including think that as I said, this alliance between government and people, having an alliance between government and people, government taking decisions in favor of the public interest is important. So it is not to deny the existence of businesses. It is not to deny the businesses, the environment, creating an environment for the businesses to flourish. But even businesses are failing, they should be allowed to, I mean, the government should not bail out them. Now, in the recent 2008 economic crisis in United States, we saw that there is this ask for governments to come and bail out. So when the big businesses are performing well, they always talk about liberal principles. But when they are failing, they want governments to save them. So that is what we call this neoliberal era, where governments concern more about big businesses. So typically businesses should be free to operate, and even there are some say it's too big to collapse also, some businesses, but there should be some kind of a fairness from the government side, and also must ensure that welfare of the people being taken care of, but not welfare for forever, right? But welfare should be given with some kind of a, kind of a national policy or a framework. Otherwise, always now, there's one critique against some of the people in Sri Lanka is that they are always dependent on welfare, right? But on the other hand, if you think about the inequalities have increased because when governments only focused on big projects, mass scale projects, creating infrastructure for the big businesses to come and invest, but not necessarily and that can destroy a lot of infant industries. So one way out would be to identify the infant industries that can be developed and give them incentives, give them some protectionism by the government. Because if we leave the resource allocation entirely to the market, or if the government support big businesses, I don't know whether economic success can be achieved. If you think about the way some of the countries like Japan, South Korea, they have achieved economic success is basically giving gradually declining protectionism to their infant industries until they come to a certain stage where they can compete. So that is how most of the industrial capitalist countries have developed. It's important that governments think about in this line because the local industries, infant industries, whether the government can give a protection to them till they become competitive enough, right? So it's a very difficult path, right? It takes time, but it needs a lot of government intervention and sort of very, very participatory intervention. But that is not the path that most of the countries are following. Probably, you can see some examples in India also. It's easy for them to invite investors. You can invite investors if there is anything. Now, for example, Japan invited IBA, right? Only with certain conditions, right? So therefore, foreign investors are important, but they should be connected to the national economic growth. So economic nationalism is very important. So nationalism may be bad in political sense, but economic nationalism could be very important. So therefore, giving some protectionism to infant industries in local contexts, and also uplifting the welfare of the people is very important, kind of a social democratic approach, right? So most of the economists tend to reject that this middle path, right? A mixed economic approach. They say there is no such thing called mixed economic, but the middle path is probably the way out. I hope I have answered the question.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to deliver the word of thanks on behalf of the students of the short course on cultural linkages towards an Asian ideology. First, I would like to thank our lecturer, Mr. Nuwan Herath, for sharing his time and knowledge with us and for delivering today's lecture amidst his busy schedule. Sir, we are blessed to have you contribute to this course. Next, I wish to thank Dr. Hemant Premaratna and other staff of KDU who have brought these lectures together. Thank you. Last but not least, I thank all participants from our university for joining us today. Your participation has made this lecture a successful event, and I believe it has provided you with an insight into the political issues and challenges of Asia. To conclude, let me once more express my gratitude to Mr. Nuwan Herath for accepting our invitation for the third consecutive year and delivering today's lecture. Sir, it is an honor to have you with us, and your time and efforts are deeply appreciated. Before we end, I kindly request all students to switch on your cameras in order to take a group photograph. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you.